Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakamalam Sri Gurun.
Welcome back to the Bhaktisastri online program. In our previous lesson, we were looking at the general principles of Varnashram Dharma as are explained in Bhagavad Gita as it is. We were discussing Arjuna's reasons for not fighting and how they're related to a confusion of Varnashram Dharma concepts. Dharma Shamudda Cheta, I'm confused about my duty. Arjuna mentioned in text 7, and we discussed general principles drawn from Arjuna's dilemma and surrender to Krishna and how it's relevant for our own development of Krishna consciousness. In today's lesson, we'll be looking at verses 12 to 48 of chapter 2, and we'll actually, in this lesson, we'll be examining how Krishna responds to the first three arguments that Arjuna proposed. So Arjuna is bewildered, as we heard in text number 7 of chapter 2, Dharma Shamudda Chetaha. In my mind, I'm bewildered about my religious duty, and he's confused, and in the dilemma, he's proposing so many reasons why he should withdraw from the fight because of compassion for all of the involved participants to avoid them being killed. Enjoyment that in killing all of the elders and family members, then it will taint our future enjoyment of the kingdom. And there'll be sinful reactions if I kill my guru, Drona, and my grandfather who cared for us so much. And destruction of the dynasty, when the elders are killed, then the family traditions will be vanquished. And also, as discussed in Bhujan Prabhu's surrender unto me. In general, he's just confused and doesn't know what to do, indecision. So today, in this lesson, in lesson 4, we're going to look at Krishna's response and Krishna's defeating the first three arguments that Arjuna makes. So in relation to Arjuna's argument of compassion to avoid the killing of so many soldiers and so many men, so much suffering. And Krishna, he explains in verses 11 to 30 the difference between the soul and the body. And in the very beginning of the chapter, there's an analogy that Prabhupada gives in the purport about saving the dress of a drowning man. So through this analogy, Srila Prabhupada is evaluating Arjuna's argument that it sounds very valid to avoid so much suffering and so much pain for all of the soldiers. But the concern, actually, it's misplaced concern because we're not the body. And that type of interest, that type of approach, you're simply looking after the external garments, and the actual being, the living entity, is drowning. And Krishna is explaining that na jayate, mriyate, bhakadachin, for at no time there is a death for the soul. These verses of Bhagavad Gita, this section of Bhagavad Gita, Jnana Yoga, Jnana section of the second chapter, in the Sanskrit Gita, actually, this chapter is called Sankhya Jog, and that's because here the Sankhya means counting, and we're analyzing what is eternal and what is temporary. And this is the method of Sankhya Yoga, by counting and identifying temporary things that have an end and that which doesn't have an end, the spirit soul, and being able to recognize both and adopt a lifestyle considering that. That's called a Jnana Yogi, which we'll be discussing more in subsequent lessons in this unit. This section of Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is responding to Arjuna's argument about compassion, is very predominantly, verses from this section are predominantly referred to by Srila Prabhupada in his preaching in general, because Prabhupada being the great acharya of the modern world who spread Krishna consciousness in the Western countries where people have no concept of their eternal identity as Krishna's servant. So Prabhupada he's emphasizing the Atma Tattva Gyan, the difference between the body and the soul. Because in the Western countries, where they're resplendent in material development, there is a great lacking of spiritual knowledge, and people, even the most highly educated people in the Western world, may have no idea that they are not the body. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada, he stressed this extremely often in his preaching, and these verses in this section, we won't go through them in great detail in the Bhaktisastri program, because already we're assuming that the Bhaktisastri students already have some understanding of the difference between the soul and the body. So we won't explore this in great detail, but not to undermine its importance in our preaching in general. And so many of these verses, Srila Prabhupada would regularly quote. Of course, in texts 12 and 13, he's discussing very deeply the concept of the eternality of all individuals, as Krishna is explaining that never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings. And Prabhupada's explaining how even after liberation, the eternality of the soul exists based on this evidence Krishna mentions here. Text 13, a very important verse, also a memorization verse for your Bhaktisastri curriculum. Dehinosmin jata dehe. Komanam yovanam jara, just like we are passing in this body from youth to boyhood to old age, tata deha antara prapti. So in the same way, deha antara, there is changing of bodies. And dhiras tattara na muyati. The learned person is not bewildered. There's such an important verse, so oft frequently quoted by Srila Prabhupada. And generally, when we are questioned about what's the evidence of transmigration of the soul, this actually is the evidence that we're transmigrating in this life. And therefore, tata dehant, in the same way, deha antara prapti. There will be, as we're accepting new bodies in this life, tata dehantara prapti. Similarly, there is accepting a new body when this body comes to its final demise. So many other verses regularly quoted by Prabhupada. Tam titikshashva bharata. We'll discuss this a little later this morning when we're looking at Jnana, Krishna's beginning his instructions on Jnana. That actually the life of the Vaishnava is not so much preoccupied with trying to improve his material circumstances, because agama apayana anitta. And there's realization that happiness comes and happiness goes, misery comes and misery goes, and simply you just have to wait. And then the circumstances change. This is the standard environment that we find ourselves in this material world, and therefore Krishna's recommendation is don't get so much absorbed and preoccupied in trying to reduce the suffering and increase the happiness, because automatically it's going to come of its own accord. Tan titikshashva bharata. Just learn to tolerate it and practice Krishna consciousness. A very important verse. Avinasi, Prabhupada comments in the purport to text 17, Avinasi tutadviri yena sarvamidam tutam. That yena sarvamidam tutam, that which is permeating the entire body, yena sarvamidam tutam, avinashi tutadviri. You should understand that that is imperishable, it never dies. In the purport, Prabhupada explains that in this verse it's more clearly explains the real nature of the soul, which is spread all over the body. More clearly, more than what? Well, we could say that text 13 was quite a theoretical analysis. Just as you are changing bodies in this life, so similar as logic, using logic, changing bodies in this life, tata dehantarapra, in the same way you change bodies at the demise of this body. Now Prabhupada's saying here that more clearly explains the real nature of the soul by experience, is relying on experience. This verse here, Krishna is using an experiential approach. Avinasi tutadvidi, you know, tutadvidi, you have experience of. You know that which is pervading your entire, yenesarvamidam tadam, that which pervading your consciousness pervades your body. And we experience that, we can feel that consciousness. And Krishna is saying that that's avinasi, that never dies, that consciousness, that I am. Aham brahmasmi, I am a being, I am alive. That consciousness never dies. And not at any time. A very powerful verses. Prabhupada also in these purports, he's quoting from various Upanishads, as we will understand, we will discuss when we're studying the Sri Isha Upanishad, that Prabhupada comments that in order to make one's argument very strong, one has to quote from the Upanishads. And so we see regularly in Prabhupada's purports in the Bhagavad Gita references to the Upanishads. And therefore his arguments are becoming irrevocably strong, as Prabhupada himself mentions in the introduction to the Isha Upanishad, that the Vedic aphorism are axiomatic truths. There's no need to experiment or test, because they're beyond being tested. They simply accept a Shruti mantra. So these Vedic mantras are regularly referred to in Prabhupada's purports. The size of the soul, he mentions, he's quoting from various Upanishads. Another amazing statement from Srila Prabhupada, based on his own realization and how he is enlightening the whole of humanity into the Atma Tattva. Prabhupada comments that the influence of such a spiritual spark is spread all over the body, as the influence of the active principle of some medicine spreads throughout the body. This current of the spirit soul is felt all over the body as consciousness, and that is the proof of the presence of the soul. Amazing paragraph where Prabhupada is explaining that just as you take a medicine, you feel its effect. So similarly, the tiny spirit soul is present in the body, but the consciousness is permeating our whole body. Why? Because of the presence of that tiny spirit soul. And consciousness is proof of the presence of the soul. And text 20, another very important verse, na jayate namriyate vakadachin nayam bhutva bhavadava bhanavuya ajonitya shashvata yang purano nahanyate hanyamane sharire nahanyate. It's not destroyed. Hanyamane sharire, when the body is destroyed. Another brilliant analogy Prabhupada gives. Sometimes we do not find the sun in the sky owing to clouds for some reason, but the light of the sun is always there. As soon as there is a little light in the sky in early morning, we can understand the sun is in the sky. Similarly, since there is some consciousness in all bodies, whether man or animal, we can understand the presence of the soul. A brilliant analogy to help us understand that the same type of eternal spirit soul is present in all beings. So in concluding, Krishna is mentioning in text number 27, Dhruvan Janma Mritasya cha, that those who have taken birth, for them certainly death is unavoidable. Now Prabhupada is summarizing Krishna's arguments in the 18th verse of the second chapter, that from both viewpoints there is no causal limitation, because the living entity as he is cannot be killed, nor can the material body be saved for any length of time or permanently protected. So Krishna is concluding here that you're not actually killing the living entity when you're doing your duty as the Kshatriya, because the living entity can never die. And similarly, by withdrawing from the fight, you're not going to permanently be able to protect those bodies, because it's inevitable that they will die. So simply because out of compassion to try to avoid their death, there's no reason, there's no valid reason for you to abandon your prescribed duty as the Kshatriya. In this way, Krishna simultaneously, he addresses Arjuna's erroneous argument, and he's beginning to, as we were discussing in our last lesson, chalk out, to give lesson to all of humanity on the science of the soul. In the next section of verses, Krishna is defeating Arjuna's argument of enjoyment. Arjuna was arguing that if at the cost of killing all of our family members, there will be no enjoyment for us subsequently, even though we win the kingdom. So Krishna is explaining in verses 31 to 37, he's explaining some of the principles of karma kanda. Karma kanda means the section of the Vedas which deals with how to live in this world in such a way to legally enjoy. That's called the karma kanda. In general, in the material world, we see people on the platform of vikarma. That's the animal platform. There's no regulation. There is simply hedonism or unrestricted sense enjoyment. That's called sinful activity or vikarma. But when a person actually enjoys in this world according to the regulations of the Vedic literature, that's called karma kanda. So Krishna is referring to some of the principles of karma kanda in his response to Arjuna's argument about enjoyment. Krishna is explaining in text 37, O son of Kunti, either you will be killed on the battlefield, or you will attain the heavenly planets, or you will conquer and enjoy the earthly kingdom. So either Krishna is explaining here that there will be two outcomes, two options. One option is that you are killed on the battlefield and doing your duty as a Kshatriya. Now, if that's the case, you will enjoy. because the Kshatriya who's killed doing his duty in the religious battle, he's immediately elevated to the heavenly planets. And the other option is that if they win the battle, then they'll be victorious and they'll regain their empire. So Krishna is explaining that in this battle, if you fight, only the outcome will be enjoyment for you. Because either you'll win the battle or you'll be killed and you'll go to the heavenly planets. So the only outcome will be enjoyment. So if enjoyment is of interest to you, as it is, because Arjuna brought up the argument, and for that reason Krishna is speaking on this level, you're interested in enjoyment, then you should fight. He's continuing that in text 34 to 36. If you don't fight, if you're interested in enjoyment, then just consider this, that if you withdraw from the fight, people will always speak of your infamy, and for a respectable person, dishonor is worse than death. What could be more painful for you? Particularly for the Kshatriyas, their reputation is a very important consideration, a reputation. For those in the Brahminical platform, reputation is not such an... of course, for a preacher, reputation is essential, because one has to have authority and one has to be able to genuinely represent the teachings and be reputed in that way. Otherwise, no one will want to listen to your preaching. But Tulya Nindashtuti, in the later sections of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is explaining that an advanced person is not so much, sees equally criticism and praise. But in this case, Krishna is explaining that this will be very painful for Arjuna, because such a prestigious hero and a great warrior and a great leader, and naturally such a person is praised and respected by all of the society, and it's very difficult for such a person that has had that type of respect shown to be criticized and be minimized. It's very painful. Arjuna is considering that I withdraw from the battle, it will be appreciated. People will think, oh, Arjuna did such a wonderful thing. But Krishna he's revealing that illusion, because people will not say that. They will not appreciate it. They will not think that Arjuna withdrew from the battle for virtuous reasons. They will think that he withdrew from the battle out of fear and out of cowardice. And he'll be minimized and criticized for that. And this would be very, very painful. So Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that if enjoyment is a point of consideration for you, then you better not withdraw from this battle, because the infamy and the ill repute that it will produce will be too much difficult, will be too painful for you to tolerate. It will be more painful than dying on the battlefield. Krishna is explaining that saga dvara apavritam, that the result of the Kshatriya dying on the battlefield will be attainment of the heavenly planets. And he's continuing that in text 33, if, however, and this is in regard to sinful reactions, Arjuna's argument of sinful reactions. So Krishna's explaining that for the Kshatriya to accept the challenge and fight in the religious battle, he's killing the other warriors. There's no sinful reaction for that, because he's doing the duty of the Kshatriya. And those warriors who were killed there attaining the heavenly planets, if he's killed, he's attaining heavenly planets, there's no sin for the Kshatriya who is engaged in battle for religious reasons, and Krishna is explaining this. However, in text 33, Krishna comments that if you do not perform your religious duty of fighting, then you will certainly incur sin. So Arjuna was arguing that I will get sinful reaction for killing Drona and Bhishma. And Krishna is explaining, if sinful reaction is a point of consideration for you, then understand that withdrawing from the battle contravenes the essential principles of the Kshatriya Dharma, Jute Chapi Apalayanam, we discussed in our previous lesson, courage in battle. And if you withdraw from the battle, you get sinful reactions. In text 33, Prabhupada's commenting, if he abandoned the battle, not only would he neglect his specific duty as a Kshatriya, but he would lose all his fame and good name and thus prepare his royal road to hell. In other words, he would go to hell by not fighting, but by withdrawing from the battle. In this connection, Prabhupada gives the example of a great warrior, a Rajput warrior, Yasamanta Sen. So the story goes that Yasamanta Sen went out left his palace, went out to the battlefield, and he was defeated. And he came back to the palace. And then the guards, everything was locked up, and so he sends a message to tell the queen that her king has returned. And the guards went off, gave the message, and the guards came back to Yasomanta Sen with a message from the queen. And they said, and the message was as follows: that the queen says, "My husband, Yasomanta Sen, he's a Kshatriya. So therefore he either vanquishes his enemies on the battlefield, or he lays down dead on the field of war. So this person who has been defeated by the enemy and has returned must be an imposter." And in this way, she kept the door closed. Because you get the point here. Kshatriya, you challenge in a battle, there's going to be there's two outcomes. He dies, you live, or you die, he lives. This is Kshatriya spirit. And that's why we were mentioning this is heroic. Not everyone has the courage to do this. It's all or nothing. It's a very heroic approach, that I will vanquish you and be the hero, or I will be vanquished and be killed. And there's no other outcome. So one has to have great courage to be able to function on this level as a Kshatriya. And hearing actually the story goes on that Yasomanta Sen, either he conquers the battle or lays down the body there dead. So the man who has come, he must be somebody, a pretender. So she refused to open the door. This is the spirit of the Kshatriya. Actually, we've heard later that subsequently he became inspired by his wife in that way. And Yasomanta Sen, he went back again to the battlefield and he was able to defeat the enemies. Let's have a little bit of a summary of what we've discussed so far. So in texts 11 to 30, where Krishna is explaining the difference between the body and the soul, jnana, there Krishna has defeated Arjuna's argument of compassion. And in verses 37 to 38, Krishna has both defeated arguments of enjoyment, that if you fight, you will enjoy, because either you'll get heavenly planets or you'll win the kingdom. And sinful reactions, if you withdraw from the fight, you'll incur sinful reactions. And there is no sinful reaction for the Kshatriya who slays the enemy on the battlefield. Prabhupada is summarizing these two principles, what we've looked at so far, defeating the compassion argument, defeating the enjoyment argument, and the sinful reaction argument. Prabhupada comments, in both ways you have to fight. Krishna is trying to put Arjuna in the dilemma, this way or that way, you must have to fight. If you think that you are not in the bodily concept of life, then it's my order, you must fight. If you think that you are in the bodily concept of life, then you are a Kshatriya, you must fight. Both ways you have to fight. This is Krishna's conclusion. So Arjuna, he has the options. Either he can consider himself a liberated soul, and therefore he understands that when killing on the battlefield, I'm not actually killing the souls, seeing from the transcendental point of view. So either he's on that platform, and if he's on that platform, then no reason for him not to engage in a war, because he knows he's not killing them. Or he's on the conditioned platform, and if he's on the conditioned platform, he's a conditioned soul, therefore he's obliged to perform the religious duties for the conditioned souls, the Kshatriyas, influenced by the mode of passion, and therefore he should perform his duty and fight in the battle. So both ways, he's been cornered by Krishna. If you think you're liberated, then no reason for you to not fight, because you're not killing them anyway. And if you complain, well, I'm not liberated, then you have to perform your prescribed duties to Kshatriya. In this way, he has no other option. He's been completely defeated by Krishna. Now, Krishna subsequently minimizes the importance of the Karma Kanda, the division of the Vedas, after spending a few verses, not so many, 7 verses there from 31 to 37, where Krishna is talking about your reputation, he's talking about your enjoyment, he's talking about the heavenly planets, he's talking about reputation, etc. These are not directly transcendental considerations. These are considerations about material enjoyment. And Krishna is referring to the principles of the Karma Kanda, the division of the Vedas, in order to address Arjuna's misconception. But quickly, after discussing from this point of view, Krishna quickly, he begins to minimize the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas and the principles therein presented. in text number 42, Yam imam pushpatam bacham pravadanti avipashchitaha vedavada rata parta. The avipashchitaha means those who lack discrimination. Vipashchitaha. Vipashchita is discrimination. Avipashchitaha. Those who lack discrimination. Prabhupada translates as men of small knowledge, are very much attached to the flowery words of the Vedas, which recommend various fruitive activities for elevation to heavenly planets, result in good birth, power, and so forth. So these types of injunctions that Krishna previously was suggesting in the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas, Krishna here mentions that these are for less intelligent people. Trigunna Vishaya Veda, Nishtragunna Bhavajuna. That the Vedas are dealing predominantly with the Trigunna. Vishaya means the subject of Trigunna Vishaya Veda. The Vedas are dealing predominantly with the subject of the three modes of material nature and how to function within the influence of the modes in the material world in such a way to legally enjoy Nistragunna Bhavajuna. Krishna is here, he's indicating that the actual purpose of the Vedas is not simply improving our enjoyment, but it is transcending the influence of the modes. Nishtragunna. You overcome, you transcend bhava. Arjuna. Become transcendental to the three modes of material nature, O Arjuna. Here's an exercise for you. If you take a look at verses 45 and 46 of the second chapter and the purports, and discuss the relevance of Karma Kanda division of the Vedas and the practice of Krishna consciousness. How are the practices of ISKCON authorized from the Vedic point of view? Read those purports and answer those questions. Prabhupada's beginning his purport to text number 46. The rituals and sacrifices mentioned in the Karma Kanda division of the Vedic literature are meant to encourage gradual development of self-realization. So yes, following Karma Kanda is useful. However, Krishna consciousness immediately connects one to the spiritual platform where one is beginning to serve Krishna by the simple activities of bhakti yoga, chanting Hare Krishna, taking prasadam, hearing about Krishna, remembering Krishna. This is the direct method. It's not a gradual method, because immediately we are situated on our eternal position as the eternal servant of Krishna, and we begin functioning on that level, at the level of practice, sadhana bhakti. So if you're already on the level of Krishna consciousness, either at sadhana or at perfect stage, there's no need. Having come to Krishna consciousness, even on the level of practice, sadhana bhakti, I want to speak of siddha, or perfect Krishna consciousness, but even at the level of sadhana bhakti, it need not necessary for the bhakta to perform any of the items of karma kanda, because what the gradual performance of the rituals of karma kanda, what that produces is automatically included in the platform of Krishna consciousness. Therefore, in the verse, Krishna explains that all purposes served by a small well can at once be served by a great reservoir of water. So having come to Krishna consciousness, there's no need for one to practice preliminary activities to bring one to Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada's quoting from the prayers of Mother Devahuti in 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam to emphasize this point more clearly. Aho bhatasva pachoto gariyam ya jiva grevajade namatubhyam. Aho means amazing, means how glorious. This is something extraordinary. Aho bhatasva pachoto. Even if born in the family of dog eaters, ya jivagre namatubhyam. Those who have taken your name, jivagre means not even necessarily seriously chanting, but the beginning of chanting, jivagre, just beginning to chant or just a little bit of chanting. Nama tubhyam, jivagre vatate nama tubhyam. Just by a little bit of chanting Hare Krishna, then it is to be understood. That's what's amazing. Oh, this was amazing. This is something extraordinary, because just by a little bit of chanting Hare Krishna, then it is to be understood that all of the results one acquires as a result of tepus, tapas, juhuvu, shashnu, performing Vedic ritualistic ceremonies, visiting holy places and taking baths, performing different types of bratas and other austerities, brahmanachu, studying all of the Vedic literatures, Brahmanature, you get whatever results doing that produces, namagrinanti eta, you get just by accepting the name of Lord Hari. So in this way, one who's taken to Krishna consciousness, there's no need for him to perform any of the ritualistic activities prescribed in the Karma Kanda. In the previous purport also, Prabhupada summarizes the attitude of the devotee in this connection, that we shouldn't be so much concerned about trying to improve our material situation, increase our punya and prosperity by performing the Vedic ritualistic activities. As long as the material body exists, there are actions and reactions in the material modes. One has to learn tolerance in the face of dualities such as happiness and distress, or cold and warmth, as we were referring to that verse earlier that Krishna mentioned. Tante tiksha shvabharata agama apayana anitta. Is temporary, it will come, it will go. By tolerating such dualities, one becomes free from anxieties regarding gain and loss. This transcendental position is achieved in full Krishna consciousness, where one is fully dependent on the goodwill of Krishna. So the devotee is just depends upon Krishna to look after him and provide him with all of the material necessities, and it has no necessity to perform ritualistic ceremonies to ensure his prosperity in this world. He's satisfied with whatever Krishna provides for him, and he serves Krishna. And Krishna himself confirms this later in Bhagavad Gita in the Rajaguhya chapter, the confidential teachings of bhakti, that Ananyas chintayantamam yejana payupashate, those who worship me with exclusive devotion, tesham nitta abhijuktanam, and they're not so much interested in improving their material situation, tesham nitta abhijuktanam yogakshemam bahamyaham, those who are constantly interested, engaged, abhijukta, simply connected in serving me, I personally take care of everything that they require. In this way, we understand no necessity for a devotee to practice any of the preliminary procedures of the Karma Kanda division of the Vedas. Prabhupada comments in the purport, the best purpose of Vedanta philosophy is served by inoffensively chanting the holy name of the Lord. The highest Vedantist is the great soul who takes pleasure in chanting the holy name of the Lord. Prabhupada ki jai. Up to this point, by teaching Arjuna the principles of jnana, the difference between the body and the soul, Krishna has refuted Arjuna's argument about compassion. And by explaining the principles of karma kanda, Krishna has refuted Arjuna's arguments of enjoyment and sinful reactions. Now, carrying on to further address Arjuna's argument of sinful reaction, Krishna will now explain karma yoga or buddhi yoga. In text 39 it mentions, thus far I have described this knowledge to you through analytical study. So that's in regard the section on jnana from verses 11 to 30. Analytical study, I've explained to you about transcendence. Now listen as I explain it in terms of working without fruitive results. O son of Pritha, when you act in such knowledge, you can free yourself from the bondage of works. So this is karma yoga, which Krishna is explaining now. In text 38, Krishna explains, Shuka duke shame kritva labha labho jaya jayo tato yudhaya yujasha naivam papam avapshasi. Do thou fight for the sake of fighting, without considering happiness or distress, loss or gain, victory or defeat, and by so doing you will never incur sin. So, in the previous verses, Arjuna was being induced to fight by Krishna for the purpose of attaining the heavenly planets, or winning the kingdom, or avoiding the infamy. These are the reasons Krishna is giving. Now, in this verse, Krishna is saying, be somewhat detached from such objectives. Sukha, dukkha, sama, there's happiness and distress. Sama, be equipoised. Labha, labho, that's gain or loss. Victory, jayo, victory or defeat. You should simply be equipoised and perform your duty. Naivam papam avapshasi. In this way, there will be no sinful reaction. Previously, Krishna was inducing Arjuna to fight for the specific objectives of material enjoyment, avoiding ill repute, attaining the heavenly planets. And these are material objectives. But here Krishna is recommending that Arjuna fight simply because it's his duty to fight as a Kshatriya. Prabhupada's commenting, this is his duty, this is duty. One has to execute duty without any consideration of loss and gain. This is duty. Observing duty. Just see, you are a Kshatriya. There's no necessity of this fighting, but you should not consider whether you are gaining or losing. It's your duty to fight. If you execute your duty nicely, there is no question of sin. Karma eva adhikaraste. Your eligibility is to work. Your responsibility is to work, to do karma, as distinct from renunciation, which we'll discuss later. Ma paleshu kadachana. But you're not entitled to enjoy the fruits of your work. This is called karma yoga. Here the Lord says that you cannot stop your work, neither can you enjoy the activities, the fruit of your activities. That is work on the spiritual plane. Work on the spiritual plane means performing your prescribed duties in such a way that there'll be no reactions. Text number 48 very clearly explains what is karma yoga. Yogashta kuru karmani sangam chakva dhananjaya sid asiddho samobhutva samatvam yoga uchate. Perform your duty equiposed to Arjuna, abandoning all attachment to success or failure. Such equanimity is called yoga. Yogashta kuru karmani. So Krishna is recommending that Arjuna perform the prescribed duties, but in yoga. And how can that be done? By tyaktva, abandoning the sangha, attachment, to the result. Sid, asid, that's perfection or failure. You should sama buddva. You should become, buddva means become sama, means equipoised in success or failure. And simply, I'm doing my duty as a Kshatriya because it's my duty, and I'm not interested in getting any result from that, but I'm simply doing it as my duty. This is called samatvam. That samatvam means having that equanimity, samatha, samatva, being full of equanimity, samatvam, that is called yoga. Yoga uchate. What type of yoga is that? That's called karma yoga. As we can see here, Krishna he's not mentioning specifically, you should do the activity for me. Later he does mention that. In the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Jat Koroshi Tat Kudu Shva Mad Arpanam. Jat Koroshi, whatever you're doing, Tat Kudu Shva, do that Mad Arpanam as an offering for me. And that is Bhakti Yoga. And then he says more specifically, Patram Pushpam Palam, you offer me these things, perform bhakti. Here, Krishna is not saying become conscious of me, much chitta, which he says later. He says sama buddva. He says become equipoised. Become equipoised. Sama buddva. Become full of equanimity. So this is a preliminary platform to bhakti. The platform of karma yoga. It is above the platform of karma kanda, where a person is performing the ritualistic activities to get the results. On the platform of karma yoga, the same activities can be performed, in this case Arjuna fighting, but with detachment from the result. And there will be no reaction, there will be no sin, there will be no punya for such activities. It's transcendental, it's called karma yoga. And as we'll see, the results of this, if you glance to text number 51, just to explain how karma yoga is transcendental and leads to liberation, Krishna is explaining in the second line of the verse of text 51. Palam tyaktva manishinaha. If the candidate, if they work, karma jam buddhi juktahi, being engaged in their prescribed duties, palam tyaktva, but abandoning attachment to the result of that work, janma bandha vinirmukta, then the result of that is liberation from birth and death. In the purport to text 48, Krishna is explaining how this is a preliminary stage to Bhakti Yoga. Lord Krishna now directly says that Arjuna should fight for the sake of fighting because he desires the battle. That is the indirect hint given by Krishna to Arjuna in this verse. So Prabhupada's mentioning here that he's speaking in an indirect way. Actually, Krishna wants Arjuna to become Krishna conscious. He wants him to have love of God, and he wants him to mameka sharana, do everything in a spirit of devotion and service to Krishna. But he's not saying that here. He's saying you should do your duty in karma kanda. Let's summarize the topics that we have covered so far. That Arjuna's argument of compassion is defeated by Krishna explaining jnana in verses 11 to 30. Arjuna's arguments of enjoyment and sinful reaction are defeated by Krishna explaining about karma kanda in verses 31 to 37. And Krishna goes on to further explain about buddhi yoga or karma yoga. At this stage we can consider them the same thing. and that acting in that way, one will have no reaction, no pious reactions, no sinful reactions. And this brings us to the conclusion of the second chapter, as Prabhupada comments in the concluding purport of chapter 2. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has summarized the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita as being the contents for the whole text. In the Bhagavad Gita, the subject matters are Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. In the second chapter, Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga have been clearly discussed. And a glimpse of Bhakti has also been given as the contents for the complete text. So at this stage, Krishna is not directly talking about Bhakti Yoga. That will begin in the 7th chapter. Here, Krishna is talking about Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga. Let's have a look at an overview of the second chapter, which gets us in a clear picture of where we currently stand. So Arjuna surrenders, and the importance of accepting a spiritual master was emphasized in that incident. And then Krishna, he explains jnana, the difference between the soul and the body, and thus defeats Arjuna's argument of compassion. Then Krishna explains karma kanda, defeats Arjuna's arguments of both enjoyment and sinful reaction. And Krishna explains about karma yoga or buddhi yoga, and he thus defeating Arjuna's argument about sinful reaction. So subsequent to this presentation, Arjuna asks Krishna in text number 54, what are the symptoms of such a liberated soul? And Krishna will describe the symptoms of the liberated soul in the remaining verses of the second chapter from verses 54 to 72. And we will carry on with the topic in the next lesson, and we look forward to seeing you then. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki.